Join me this morning in the book of Isaiah. We're going to talk about something that only applies to you if you have ever felt like you don't have enough control over your circumstances or enough power to bring about what you should think happen. And this only applies to you if you feel like there are times you don't know exactly what to do. The prophet Isaiah has recently, in the chapters leading up to what we're going to consider this morning, has told them that because of their rejection and their rebellion against God, that he will turn them over to the desires of their heart. You know, if you ever imagine that somehow when you rebel against God, when God gives you what you want, if you haven't made the connection that he's just giving people what their heart desires, the person who their whole life says, God, stay out, God, stay away. No, God, I'm not going to listen to you. I don't want to do it your way. I want to do it my way. And I actually wish you would quit pricking my conscience. I actually wish I would quit feeling guilty. Just stay away. Well, then when God gives people at the end of their life on earth, when he gives them space from him, he's giving them what they have desired. Right? There is nobody who's like, I really want to know God in this life, and I couldn't just quite figure it out, and I didn't know the right things about Jesus, and I just didn't know. I wanted to know, but I just didn't know. That's not how it works. So when the nation of Israel began to attach their hearts to the ways of a foreign nation, the nation of Babylon, when they looked to their growing strength for their deliverance, God said to them, well, then you can have Babylon. If you don't want me, if you want Babylon, well, then you can have Babylon. So he told them, you're going to get Babylon, all of it. They will take you away. They will rob the authority of the king. They will completely take the best of the nation. They'll carry it away into judgment. Isaiah remarkably speaks the word that God gave him to speak, that though they would be in exile and be experiencing God's judgment, in receiving what they really wanted, God speaks to them a word of comfort and a word of hope. And so imagine them receiving this word sometime when the people are in exile, meaning they've been removed from their home, they have been removed from being able to make their own decisions for their own community, and now they're living in Babylon. This word this morning, picture them receiving it in that place. The word that you're going to hear this morning is God telling them, I am the one who is powerful, and I am the one who always knows what to do. Therefore, because I have power, and because I know what to do, you can trust my control over all things. Right? How often do we find ourselves not having the power we want, or not knowing what to do? Therefore, we feel out of control. When we feel powerless, when we feel uncertain, what is that like? Take powerless and uncertain and put those together. Anxious, afraid, vulnerable, looking for comfort, looking for security, looking for hope. This is what happens to everybody when you don't have enough power and when you don't know what to do. You put those two together, you're incredibly vulnerable. So God is going to remind us this morning through his word that when we don't have the power that we want and we don't have all of the understanding that we want, we can, in that place of vulnerability, we can be reminded that God is powerful, powerful enough to accomplish all of his purposes, and he knows what he's doing, so we should trust him. All right, he's going to do this through questions and through some really powerful imagery that helps us appreciate his power and his wisdom. So start with me in verse 12. It begins with expressions of his power through images and questions. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand and marked off the heavens with a span, and closed the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales and the hills in a balance? The imagery and the questions, they're more powerful than just statements. because they enable you to conceptualize God's power and to compare it to things. So meditate with me out loud on some of these images. Measures the waters in the hollow of his hand. That's the little cup that your one hand makes. Take a look at the little cup in your hand and wonder, how much water does that hold? I mean, take a good look at it. I mean, notice you get that little crack in between your two fingers. So if you could really squeeze that down really tight and make it watertight, how much water do you think you could put in there? Somebody in the room has the smallest hand, and you look down and you're like, I mean, picture like an eyedropper. Boop, boop. I mean, at what point would it just start seeping out the creases? 25, 30 drops maybe. Some of you have a bigger hand, and you're like, that's just a little bit. God measures in the hollow of his hand all of the water of the earth. That's a lot of water. What can you do with the amount of water that fits in the hollow of your hand? You can get an unsatisfying drink. Like, have you ever put your hand under the hose in the summer just to fill up your hand and like, that's all I want. I'm satisfied. What can you do with the water that fits in one hand? It's not even enough to rinse your face. Right? When you go to the sink and you want to wash your face, do you ever stick one hand under there? Sometimes you've had to, for whatever reasons. You're like, this is completely ineffective. We immediately go for two. And even then, we have to do it several times. This is an image of God's power. It invites you to think clearly. How much power do we really have in the first place? I mean, it's easy to wish we had just a little bit more so that we could get accomplished what we think should be accomplished. But how much power do you really have? And how much power does he have? He measures the waters in the hollow of his hand, and he marked off the heavens with a span. How big is a span? Hold your hand up. Come on, audience participation. Look at the back of your hand. The distance from your thumbnail to your pinky nail, that's a span. That's your span right there. That's a hand span. What could you fit in that space? If you have like really good size hands like I wish I had, you could get like a full 9 inches, maybe more. If you have my little bitty hand, you can't even get 9 inches. And many of you that are younger, you're going to be lucky to get maybe 6, maybe 7. Some of you, if you get 5, don't worry, you'll grow someday. What does God hold in the span of his hand? What can he measure? What fits within the span of his hand? What does it say? The heavens. That's the sky. All the water on earth, 75% of where we live, fits in the hollow of his hand. And the heavens, how many billions of light years currently across that we are aware of? It fits in the span of his hand. He is supremely powerful. He's enclosed the dust of the earth in a measure. The Hebrew of this is a little bit, it's not as clear to us. Measure, the word literally means a third. An equivalent would be a measuring cup. You know how in your house somewhere you got measuring cups? If you're like our house, we have the plastic measuring cups. We're on like our 20th set of measuring cups because I don't even know where they go. Maybe you keep them in the cabinet. Maybe you keep them in the junk drawer. They almost never are all there in the set. So you get them on that key ring, right? So they sell them on the key ring, except for that is so impractical. So you take them off the key ring, and then you lose them. One of your cups, if you like measuring cups, you've got the cup that is 1 cup, and then you have the one that's a quarter and a half. If you have a really fancy set, you have one that's a third of a cup. That's literally what this is. It's the third portion, the third measure. God measures the dust of the earth in the third of his cup. He's weighed the mountains in scales, and the hills in a balance. Picture the scale, the balance. And on God's balance fits the Rocky Mountains. And then right next to the Rockies, just as he's showing off, he like put the Andes in there. And then the Himalayas. And he was just getting started. So then he put like the little mountains, like the Blue Ridge Mountains and the Allegheny Mountains. Fits on the scale. This is power. If you find yourself, when you find yourself in situations where you cannot get accomplished what you think should be accomplished, you are reminded to consider that God accomplishes what he sets out to accomplish because he is powerful. You and I lack power. God does not. That's power. Part of God's sovereign control of all things. It requires power, and it requires knowing what to do. Wisdom. So now these next images bring to mind the attribute of God's wisdom. Who has measured the Spirit of Yahweh? Or what man shows him his counsel? Whom did he consult, and who made him understand? Who taught him the path of justice, and taught him knowledge, and showed him the way of understanding? In the Babylonian creation myth, the most powerful God that is the creator has to consult a lesser God for insight and wisdom. Isaiah, inspired by the Holy Spirit, is reminding the Israel people living in Babylon, your God didn't have to consult anybody. He's the real creator, and he didn't need anybody or anything to advise him. This is one of the ways that God is completely unlike us. How often do we find ourselves not entirely sure what to do? And it's not just on the little insignificant things, like on the big things. How often do we find ourselves just not sure what to do? And when you need information, where do you turn? The Google. We all need more information, more insight, more understanding. Do we look for it in God? Okay, you're thinking, people. You're like, well, okay, I'm trying to build something in my backyard. I mean no disrespect. Let's just be practical here. Should I pray and ask God to help me build my shed, or should I just go to YouTube? I'm not trying to trick you here. If you go to God and ask him to help you build your shed, I'm going to go to YouTube, and I will build my shed faster than you do. When you need insight in life, in the substantive things, the meaningful things, how do I approach relationships? How do I approach parenting? What do I do with my angst as I try to care for my aging parent? How do I prioritize my limited amount of resources? Do I save for my kids to go to college? Do I buy a better house? Do I just save my money? Do I invest it for the future? Do I continue to give generously? What do you, the most substantive things, how often do you find yourself not knowing exactly what to do? To whom do you turn then? It's easy for us to look to others, other things, other people. We should go first to God. He is the one who is wise. Who taught him? Who is wiser than God that you're going to go get insight from? Power and wisdom. Now in verse 15, he brings back some of the same images he has already used. Behold, he says, the nations are like a drop from a bucket and are accounted as the dust on the scales. Behold, he takes up the coastlands like fine dust. Now Isaiah is going to begin to help us consider. When we lack power, when we lack understanding of knowing what to do, in that vulnerable place, when we don't have control, to what or whom do we turn? I mean, think about this for a minute. When you do not have control over things like you want, You begin to feel anxious. You begin to feel afraid. Some of you begin to feel irritable. How do you feel when you don't have the insight you need or the power that you need to move forward? What are you vulnerable to do? What are you likely to turn to? Those are things that you tend to put in the place of God. Not that you all out in that moment are worshiping those things, but think about it. You lack power and you lack wisdom. We're meant to turn to God, but who do you turn to instead? What do you turn to instead? God is going to address what the Jewish people were most likely to find themselves turning to. The nations are like a drop from a bucket. Remember, they were not in control of their destiny as a people. There are world powers threatening around them. They decided instead of trusting in God who had delivered them in the past, they were going to trust themselves to Babylon. Behold, the nations are like a drop from a bucket. A drop from a bucket. A drop of what? Easy answer. A drop of what? Come on, humor me. A drop of what? Yeah, what was the image Isaiah just used with water earlier? God, all the water of the earth fits in the hollow of his hand. All the nations of the earth, they're like one drop in one bucket, completely insignificant from a standpoint of power. He's not saying that they're not made in his image. He's talking about something completely different. He's talking about his power to be sovereignly in control of all things. Behold, the nations are like a drop from a bucket and are accounted as the dust on the scales. Any power in the world, any national figure in the world, no power compared to God. What relevance does that have in our life? In our culture, way too often, we can get so angry and worked up about whoever the president of our country is. There are many who don't care for the sitting president and speak of the sitting president and the party that he represents as though they are the devil incarnate. And there are others who do the exact same thing about the previous president or the next one who might become the president. Why do we, because this is real, some of us find ourselves getting anxious and afraid about who is going to sit on the throne of the United States of America. That is a drop in a bucket. Or this image, like dust on a scale. Okay, let's think about that image. Dust on a scale. Now you're in your bathroom on the bathroom scale. Why do we have scales? We universally don't like the scale. How many of you see your scale and say, I bless you, scale. I am glad to see you, scale. I look forward to the information you are about to give me. This is going to be encouraging and affirming. I should have more scales. I should get more scales. But yet we have them. Okay, so you get on the scale. You look down. How often is the number a little bit higher than you want it to be? Almost every time, right? The number's a little higher than you want it to be. Have you ever looked down and said the number is higher than it should be? Oh, I know why. I forgot to wipe the dust off first. It has nothing to do with what you ate over Thanksgiving. It has nothing to do with your lack of activity. It was the dust on the scale. This is what all the powers of the world are like compared to God. Behold, he takes up the coastlands like fine dust. Lebanon would not suffice for fuel. That's an image. Lebanon was beautifully forested by pines and cedars. All the wood of that whole country wouldn't be enough for fuel. All its animals wouldn't even be enough for a burnt offering. All the nations are as nothing before him. They are accounted by him as less than nothing and emptiness. If you are in Christ, your citizenship is in heaven, and we eagerly await a Savior from there, the Lord Jesus Christ, who by the power that enables him to bring everything under his control will transform our lowly bodies so they will be like his glorious body. That means we live in this earth as citizens of the United States of America, knowing that this is temporary. Our greatest passion, our greatest energy should be in allegiance to the real King that we will serve forever. We should be good citizens of our country. Absolutely, the scriptures teach us to. But we should not lose sight of the fact that we are a part of a kingdom that will endure forever. A kingdom whose ruler and whose king is the supremely powerful one. He is powerful enough to accomplish his purposes. And he knows what he's doing. So we can trust him. To whom then, in light of these things, verse 16, will you liken God? What likeness compare with him? Now, don't lose me in this next section. They were tempted to find greater power, greater security, greater hope in a foreign nation. And now God is going to address their temptation and their tendency that we actually share to look for power, to look for wisdom, to look for the comfort and the security that we crave when we don't have control. They look to idols, things of their own making, and we do the same, although our idols are no longer carved objects. Listen, this is what he says. To whom then will you liken God, or what likeness compare with him? An idol? A craftsman casts it, and a goldsmith overlays it with gold, and casts for it silver chains. He who is too impoverished for an offering chooses wood that will not rot. He seeks out a skillful craftsman to set up an idol that will not move. In their time, there are still cultures that do this, where they lack power and where they lack certainty of what to do. In that vulnerability, they would turn to an idol. They would turn to something that they made, that they would ascribe a greater power than they had to, right? But it was an object of their own making. This is what Isaiah is saying. Why, when you lack power and you lack an understanding of knowing what to do, why in that vulnerability would you turn to something of your own creation? You don't turn to carved images anymore. Our culture does not have a problem with carving objects out of wood and then praying to them. That's not widely rampant in our culture. But do you ever, when you're feeling out of control, overwhelmed, discouraged, dismayed, hopeless, do you ever turn to things of your own making? I don't know. Let me check my phone. Let me get my computer out. Let me check my bank account. Let me go for a walk and remind myself how wonderful of a place I live. You don't get your phone out and worship it. You don't look at your bank account and worship it. But when you're feeling out of control, don't you find some comfort in those things? Aren't you tempted to find some security in those things? I don't have the power I need. I don't know exactly what to do. A night of drinking, frankly, will help. Pleasuring myself in some way outside of God's provision, that will at least distract me from the pain. That will numb the pain. That will soothe me. God is reminding them and reminding us, He is the powerful one. He is the wise one. When we lack the power that we want, when we lack the wisdom that we want, in that place of vulnerability, we turn to Him, not to anything of our own making. Do you not know, he says, verse 21, do you not hear? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers. We are like grasshoppers to God. How many times more intelligent than a grasshopper are you? Many, many times. Have you ever tried to speak to a grasshopper to benefit from its power or its wisdom? That's ridiculous. Okay, well, we are less different in our power and our insight than a grasshopper than we are to God. The distance is greater. He regards us like grasshoppers. It's he who sits above the circle of the earth. What's the circle of the earth? What's that an image of? I think maybe like if you stand on a high enough hill or on a tower and you get a view of the horizon, what's that shape around you? Circle. When you hold up a ball out in front of you or you see it across the room, what shape do you see? Circle. God is above. These are all pictures of his power and his might. He stretches out the heavens like a curtain, and he spreads them like a tent to dwell in. How cool is that? Some of you like camping. You've been in the woods. You want to pop up a quick shelter. So in a pinch, you can just throw a tarp over some branches and call it good. So imagine God going for a walk in the woods, and he's like, I'll just throw up a tarp. And he reaches, and he pulls out of his bag, and his tarp is the heavens. These are pictures and images of his power and his might. When you feel powerless, when you fill your mind with things like this, it helps you know and feel God's power. He brings princes to nothing, and he makes the rulers of the earth as emptiness. Princes, these are weighty ones. The Hebrew word here has a root in weight. Like God's glory is weighty and heavy. He's saying God brings the princes, the weighty ones, to nothing. The important people, their status, their power, their standing, their resources, apart from God, nothing. He makes the rulers, those are the decision makers. He makes the rulers of the earth as emptiness. Scarcely are they planted, scarcely sown. Scarcely has their stem taken root in the earth when he blows on them and they wither, and the tempest carries them off like stubble. Where have you seen stubble lately? You've seen a bunch of it. If you've done any driving around here recently, you've seen all kinds of stubble. Almost all of the cornfields have been harvested around here. The stuff that's left in the field, stubble. Wind blows, moves it around. I mean, think about that. The most powerful rulers of the most powerful nations in the world, compared to God's power, they have as much power as the stubble does in the cornfield. That is a really powerful image to remind us God is powerful. He ends the section with this question. To whom then will you compare me that I should be like him? Says the Holy One. That is so good. Holy is by definition set apart. He is the set apart one. To whom then will you compare me that I should be like him? I am the set apart one. I am the one unique in my power, unique in my understanding. This is why God alone is the one who is sovereign over all things. So why when he does not let us experience all the power that we need? Why when he does not let us have all of the understanding that we want? Why in that place where we lack those things? Why would we entrust ourselves to any lesser thing? Especially something of our own making. We can trust him. We can rely upon him. Lift up your eyes on high and see. Who created these? We'll end with this image, and then I'll make a direct connection to Christ. Lift up your eyes on high and see. Okay, now we're outside. We're outside. The sun has gone down and it's dark. It's starting to get cold. Why is it starting to get cold? It was warm during the day, but wow, it's really starting to get cold because all the clouds are gone. It's a clear night. You can begin to see, look up, the stars. Take a look, God says. Who created these? He who brings out their host by number, calling them all by name, by the greatness of his might, and because he is strong in power, not one is missing. He calls them all by name. How powerful is his voice? Who will come running when you call? Let's just do a comparison, just for a second, of power of voices. Who will come when you call? If you have the privilege and the blessing of being a mom or a dad, sometimes, most of the time, but not every time, your kids will come. And you can use a certain volume of voice that at times can be more effective. Some of you have dogs that you love. And you call, and if you're the right owner of the right dog, that dog comes way more consistently than kids do. And what does that dog do when that dog comes? Oh, that dog is so excited. We have one of these at home. Hillary is the right dog owner, and the dog, Addie, is the right dog for Hillary. Hillary calls the dog. Somehow the dog's ears all of a sudden become like antennas. She doesn't even have to yell very loud. Addie hears Hillary's voice, and she comes charging. Her tail is wagging so hard, like half her body moves. She comes running up. She's super excited. She wants to hug Hillary. Gross. She's like jumping all around her, barking excitedly. Now, if you're not the right person with the right dog, well, then you're like me, who experiences the limitation of my voice frequently. I would like to leave for work. The garage door is open. Dog is not in garage. I go out into the driveway and I call for the dog. And then I call again for the dog. I can't see the dog. I call again for the dog. Now I'm beginning to be concerned that I'm going to wake up the neighbors because I'm just like giving it my best yell because Hillary loves this dog and most of the kids love this dog. I'm trying to be a good husband, so I'm yelling for this dog and the dog doesn't come. Those of you who are like me, what do we do next? We just go to work. And we sort of hope the dog will come home. How powerful is God's voice? Recall that he made creation by speaking. Behold, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. You are made ultimately by the power of God's voice. The scriptures tell us God sustains the world by the breath, by the word of his power. And now a connection to Christ as the band and the choir come. These are just some of the characteristics or the attributes or the qualities of God that you can meditate on and think on with his word. These are images that God has chosen. I didn't come up with any of these. They're recorded in his word for us to be mindful of just some of his attributes. So when we sing of the baby coming at Christmas, we're singing of the word of God that took on flesh, the living word, who is alone supremely powerful and who always knows what he's doing. This is the one that we worship. This is the one that we entrust ourselves to. So as often as you find yourself feeling like you don't have the power that you want, which is almost always, and not understanding all that you want, which is almost always, in that vulnerability, you can be reminded that Christ is the one who is all-powerful and he is all-wise. Your trust in him, your allegiance to him, your obedience to him is well-founded. And then you will find you have more power and you have more understanding, because that's practically how you experience God's, by walking the path of obedience by faith. Let me give you a moment to pray, and then we'll sing a song of celebration to close.